Welcome back, everyone. Thanks again for joining me on my channel. This is It Is Finished Ministries. Again, my name is Ursulon Cockrell. And so this study today it's really a continuation of what we did in my previous video, looking at the Battle of Armageddon, the War of Gog and Magog there in Ezekiel 38 and 39. And so we laid a really good foundation starting in Revelation to see that Gog and Magog we get this imagery of the vine being trodden down. And then we see the imagery of the Gog and Magog there being prepared as a sacrifice for the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. That judgment is only spoken on Israel and Egypt, as we've shown that Israel is the antitypical Egypt. Now, something is very interesting here as we get into these chapter, and so I'm not going to cover every single verse because I think some of them we don't really need to get into, just because they don't know that, some of them just talks about these different nations being assembled together, and I don't know that that's what I do want to hit on is some of the key verses that I think really help us identify Gog and Magog. And as I already pointed out, my understanding, my belief that Gog and Magog is a reference to Israel in the old covenant age Israel, that they had become the antitypical and enemies of God. All right, so now in verse 4, Ezekiel chapter 38, we read, "I will turn you around, put hooks into your jaws, and lead you out with all your army, horses and horsemen, and splendidly clothed, a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords." Now, here we have a reference to actually Ezekiel chapter 29, verses 3 and 4. It says, "Speak and say, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I am against you, O Pharaoh, king of Egypt, O great monster, but I will put hooks in your jaw." Here we see Ezekiel describing Gog and Magog, saying he would put hooks in his jaw. And here we have in chapter 29 the same imagery here, speaking again about the king of Egypt, Pharaoh. Well, as we already described, right, we see this overlap between Israel and Egypt because Israel had become the antitypical Egypt. So Gog and Magog is here being portrayed again as Egypt and Israel. Okay, now let's jump down to verse 8. We're going to see something interesting here. It says, "After many days you shall be visited. In the latter years you shall come into the land that is brought back from the sword, and is gathered out of many people against the mountains of Israel, which have always been waste, but is brought forth out of the nations, and they shall dwell safely, all of them." Now, okay, here we have a people that is being brought forth out of the nations, being gathered together from the sword, gathered out of many people, and we find this reference to, right, Gog and Magog is coming against them. Now, go back and watch my video, Gathering of Israel. This gathering was taking place in the very first century. I show that from numerous texts, but go back and watch that, and we're going to demonstrate it even more here. In the book of Joel, right, Joel chapter 2 and verse 28, we find this imagery of the last days. God saying he would pour out his spirit. It says, "And it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams, your young men shall see visions." Okay, now Peter obviously quoted this verse on the day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2. But if we fast forward to the very next chapter, Joel chapter 3, again, we're not jumping thousands of years here, which I think is our tendency to do so. Let's read it in context. Joel chapter 3, verse 2. "And I will gather all nations, will bring them into the valley of Jehoshaphat, and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations, and parted my land." Okay, so here we have the end of chapter 2 is God will pour out his spirit. Your old man, your young woman will dream dreams. They shall prophesy. In the very next chapter, the second verse, God says he's gathering all these nations into the valley of Jehoshaphat to plead with them for his people. In the book of Acts, that is exactly what Peter is doing. Acts chapter 2 verse 5 says, "And there were dwelling in Jerusalem the Jews, devout men from every nation under heaven." Don't miss that. On the day of Pentecost, the 12 tribes which had been scattered, the 10 tribes which had been scattered abroad, are there. All 12 tribes are there, and Peter is pleading with them in that chapter. He's pleading with every Jew out of every nation under heaven. He pleads with them, speaking about in the Psalms when David had prophesied that God would make all of his enemies under his footstool. He pleads with them to come back from the untoward generation, as we're told. And so here Peter is there pleading with Israel to return back to God. And so that is exactly what we see in the first century application. And we're going to demonstrate this even more. And this is when, don't miss this, when the Spirit would be poured out. That's when this people would start to be gathered out of many nations. Okay, let's jump down to Ezekiel 38 verse 9. It says, you will ascend and come like a storm. You shall be like a cloud to cover the land, you and all your bands and many people with you. Now we find the same imagery described in Israel. This is how they were described. 1 Kings 4 verse 20. Judah and Israel were many as the sand which is by the sea in multitude, eating and drinking and making merry. We find the same thing in Isaiah 10:22. For though my people Israel be as the sand of the sea, yet a remnant of them shall return. The consummation decreed shall overflow with righteousness. So here we see this imagery that Israel was to be as the sand of the sea. They were to be like a cloud to cover the land, essentially, as we see in Ezekiel 38 verse 9 there. Now let's jump down to verses 11 and 12, because we're going to find the same repeating imagery here. Gog and Magog are coming against the people that dwell safely. You will say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely. All of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates, to take a spoil, to take a prey, to turn your hand upon the desolate places that are now inhabited, and upon the people that are gathered out of the nations and have gotten cattle and goods, that dwell in the midst of the land. So here we see again Gog and Magog coming to a land that dwells safely without bars or gates in unwalled villages. Now, if we jump to Isaiah chapter 32, we're going to see something very interesting, because God is describing this same very people, and he's described the time point. He says, on the land of my people will come up thorns and briars, yes, on all the happy homes in the joyous city, because the palaces will be forsaken. The bustling city will be deserted. The forts and towers will become lairs forever, a joy of wild donkeys, a pasture of flocks. Notice he's describing a city that has been broken down. But now notice what he describes. Until the Spirit is poured upon us from on high. Day of Pentecost. This is the timing. And the wilderness becomes a fruitful field. The fruitful field is counted as a forest. Then justice will dwell in the wilderness. Righteousness remain in the fruitful field. The work of righteousness will be peace. The effect of righteousness, quietness and assurance forever. Now here it is. My people will dwell in a peaceful habitation, in secure dwellings, and in quiet resting places. Though hail comes down on the forest, and the city is brought low in humiliation. So here we see that Israel had been broken down. Judah had been broken down. We find this from Assyria, also from Babylon on Judah and Benjamin, the southern cities. So they had become desolate, broken down. But God says, until my Spirit is poured out from on high, that's when we see this, the regathering of the people. They come together to dwell safely, which is exactly what we find in the book of Joel. And so here we have two references referencing the same time point when these people would be gathered out of many nations. They would come to dwell safely in the presence of God. And so this is the time point where Gog and Magog are coming against the mountains of Israel. Okay, and so we see this, we've seen it here in Revelation. We now see it here again in these two references to the people dwelling safely. This is a first century application, folks. It is not a future war, 2,000 years later from the New Testament, right? And so we need to keep that in mind. Okay, I'm going to keep these videos to 10 minutes. My time is up here. So thanks again for watching. Again, please leave your comments, and I really like responding to those. And don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thank you, and God bless.